The climate is changing. Oceans are warming. Extreme weather is more common. Threatened species are under strain. Whether we accept it or not, it's happening. What we might do about it is up to us. We're on borrowed time.
So hello, anyone listening? I'm Natalie McCall. I'm the head of youth services at the Mill Valley Public Library. And I'm here with Sarah, who's
Hi.
a teenage climate activist.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So can you start by just telling us how you came to be an activist?
Yeah. So I really started getting involved in activism in 6th grade. And this was around the time when my science teacher introduced our class to climate change. We did a unit on the climate crisis, what a future would look like if we didn't take urgent action on climate change. Now, we also looked at how mankind and how our previous societies and how we today are contributing to this climate crisis and to rising carbon emissions. And looking at that really impacted me, and I kind of had this just like all of a sudden just like my mind like exploded, and I couldn't believe that I had been hidden from this huge topic for so long and that no one had ever brought it up, because it seemed like the most important thing to me, because ultimately it meant life or death, and not just for me but for society. So that really kind of scared me, but also at the same time it sparked this passion inside of me and this desire to do something about it. So in 6th grade, that was kind of when it all started. And in activism, you always you're not going to do well unless it's something you're really passionate about. And I think that's, a result of why I'm where I am today, and how I had a very successful journey was that I was able to find something that really spoke to me and something that I knew would always be important to my life.
Do you have your parents' support, or how important is that to you?
Yeah. So as I continued with activism, I started to do something called school striking, which was where I would skip school every Friday to protest climate solutions and to ask that our government and that our officials and leaders actually do something about climate change and don't just sit there and watch it happen. I did that throughout 8th grade. And I think in the beginning, definitely they were skeptical. But as they began to see how much it impacted me and how important it was to me, and that this was something that meant so much more than just, like a hobby or something like that, that it really was defining my life. So I think seeing that helped them kind of overcome that fear. And just throughout the journey, I think they've been really supportive, which is something I'm really lucky to have, is parents that do support me and are, being that support system as I'm facing a lot of tough things. And, as things happen with like climate anxiety and just having to go to school every day and that type of stuff, they've always been there for me. And I think that I really owe a lot to them for being that kind of like side support system to keep me mentally okay.
Do you feel like you have support from other adults, like if it's within like a school context or just in general?
Yeah, it's hard because I think it depends obviously on the adult. In a school sense, as I went to high school this year, I'm a freshman at Redwood High School, and in that sense, it was kind of like a rude awakening because, I met with my counselor like first week of school, and I was like, hey, I do this every week. This is something that I don't plan on stopping. And they just were like, yeah, that's not going to happen. At least my school is kind of funded by having their students present in classes, and they were not able to say, this is something we can work out. This was just, flat out no, or you'd have to switch schools. So on that, no, there's not support. But I do have support from like individual teachers and from other adults that I've met throughout my journey, family, friends, even though, I'll post on like Facebook, on my dad's Facebook, and like 10 people respond like, why are you letting your daughter do this? Like, you're an awful person. Like, this is a hoax. This is not real. And like seeing that, like his friends have the nerve to say that on his feed when he's posting about me is just kind of insane. But even though there are those people, there's majority of the people are really happy and very excited about the work I'm doing, because a lot of the times there's no hope around these things, and being able to see that someone they're connected to or someone as young as me is making a difference, I think is really inspiring to them and kind of gives them a little bit of hope.
So I was reading some articles you sent me, and something I found you really clarified that I've been thinking about kind of in a fuzzier way was thinking about action in terms of personal action, political action, and systemic action. Can you explain a bit what that means?
Yeah, so I kind of like to say that there's 3 different types of actions that you can take. You can take personal, so that's like changing yourself. One of the ways I took personal action was going vegan, starting to reduce my intake of plastics and reducing kind of those things that you hear all the time, like, take shorter showers, the things that you can only do yourself that also a lot of people are like, well, that's not going to bring about change. So that's why there's personal change, because I don't think we can get this without changing ourselves, and without changing ourselves, we're not going to be able to put a lot of pressure on like our government and different institutions, which brings me to the next kind of thing is like, I have political change, because we need obviously our politics to change, and those are our leaders, and we need our leaders to step up and be the people that say, like, this isn't okay, we need to do something about this. So by putting pressure on our leaders, we're doing a lot. And in addition to that is like companies. One company that I worked on recently was BlackRock. So BlackRock was, I think, like the second biggest investor in like fossil fuels, and we started doing strikes outside of BlackRock, and we had on December 6th about like 300 people come out. We were knocking on their doors, yelling, got some media. I know, it sounds crazy, but got some media release, got a lot of student speakers. I mean, majority of the people there were students, and from there they actually started to divest from fossil fuels. So there's putting that pressure on companies and political people. And then there's institutional change, and that's kind of just like changing, I want to say, like the culture of the United States and the culture of the world, and changing our system so that, it's not, dependent on fossil fuels. And so also that it's not, still in a way like being racist and, really hurting those lower income places. And there's so many other issues that I can think of that, are also really targeted by these systems. And by tackling those systems, we can really end oppression in so many ways. And we can also kind of end the climate crisis.
Well, and that makes me think of something where I feel like a lot of people, they think of people who understand that we're in a climate crisis and this is all real, might feel overwhelmed or feel like the changes will be hard for them or negative, or their life won't be as pleasant like in the short term.
Yeah.
But do you think about it that way, or do you imagine like if we make all these changes, like maybe it'll actually be a better way of living and we'll be happier?
Yeah, definitely.
Aside from like the crisis part of it, but that all of those changes would actually be positive.
Yeah, I think all these changes would be positive because they're all focused on creating a better society and in creating a more just and equitable future for all. So not just, privileged white people, but for people who are at a lot of disadvantages. And I think that we'd be much better off implementing these changes and implementing the structure, because it's also, helping solve other issues like systematic racism. And it's so important that that ends. And I think that if we are to, fight this climate crisis and truly fight it by fighting those systems of oppression, then we will see a more equal and just future for everyone where we can all live along, maybe not completely in harmony, but more than we are today. And I think that that's something really important and that we should continue focusing on, because we're trying not only to defeat the crisis, but to make sure that we have, a positive and a really great future for the future generations.
So something that I find really frustrating, so I can only imagine how you find it, is how dismissive in general adults can be about young people in terms of climate crisis, but anything where they're saying we need action on this, or just having ideas. Do you feel, like I was reading one of the articles you sent me, and one of them linked to a bunch of young people who had gone to Dianne Feinstein and were trying to get her to support the Green New Deal. And she was completely dismissive of, you're not, you don't vote for me. I don't need to listen to you. I'm older. I know how this works. You don't know how this works. You're naive. What do you think about that attitude, or like how adults need to change how they listen to young people?
I mean, honestly, I think it's just hilarious how these people have the nerve to tell this to us when we're the ones leading this movement. We're the ones who have sought out solutions and who have gathered and persisted through this all, and we have done so much more than anyone thought was possible. And the fact that these adults think that it's okay to say, like, you're not capable of things, or you're just a teenager, you're not 18, you can't vote, like, but look what we've done. Like, we've done so much. We've, in San Francisco alone, we had 40,000 people at our last global climate strike, which is insane. So how, and it was a group of like 20 of us who planned that. So how can you say that we don't have power and that we're too young and that we're not capable of anything? Because we've accomplished so much, and so much more than many adults have done. And that's because we as the youth have so much passion, and we, as you get older, you have a lot of things more responsibilities, and also, you lose kind of some creativity, you lose that hope, you lose kind of your determination. And I think another really interesting thing about youth is that we're not focusing on what could go wrong. We're really just focusing on how we can get there, and we're going to try everything. And I think that we stick it out, and we're going through this, we're not just going to give up. So I think it's just kind of crazy that adults think they can tell us that, we just, like, you can't vote. Like, so,
or that if you can't legally vote in an election, your opinion doesn't matter.
Yeah, that your opinion doesn't matter, because our opinion does matter. And, youth make up a huge percentage of the population. And, we're doing this for the future generations, for those youth. So why don't the youth that are here right now, why don't they count? And I just think it's crazy. Yeah.
Do you, this is a tough question, but I was wondering if you have any ideas of why that doesn't connect for some people? Because listening to the Dianne Feinstein thing in particular, like, she was saying, like, of course I care. I have grandkids. But then at the same time is dismissing the young people she's talking to and isn't taking their passion seriously as she should. So, like, how people can make that disconnect of they have young people in their lives that they love, but aren't fighting for their future.
Yeah, well, I think that you don't really get that connection unless you kind of, like, have a relationship to one of those people. And I think that people like Dianne Feinstein, their main goal right now and what they're striving towards isn't an equitable future. And maybe she does want that, but that's not, like, her number one priority. And I think that she's putting that over, the youth and over our opinions, and that I think they're so caught up in that they're not able to make those connections, and they're not able to see the connections between the two. And I just think that's another, like, we just need to bridge that gap and show people that, we're your grandchildren, we might not literally be your grandchildren, but we're the same age as your grandchildren. Like, we go to school with your grandchildren, so why aren't you listening to us?
So how do you think, going back to kind of political action, what do you think people can accomplish with voting? Or is voting enough, or then what else should people be doing?
So I think, well, especially with like the primary, elections coming up and just elections in general, one of the most important things people can do that's kind of like a smaller action is vote, because we need to, like, honestly, we can't get very many places, and we're not going to be able to get as far as we'd like. It won't be as easy, at least, if we don't have someone in power who really is going to support us and prioritize climate action. So I think that, yes, it's so important and that everyone should be doing it, or at least, try to do it and try to rally others. But also, it doesn't just end at the voting. And once we do, once the new president is elected or maybe, reelected, it doesn't stop there. And that we're going to continue needing to fight for change because, they're not the all end. So I think, yes, voting does matter, and it is really important to focus on the elections right now. But we also can't forget that we're running out of time, and that's not all we should focus on, that we should also be focusing on what we can do with our current politics right now.
Do you have any advice for people on, like, local government? So there's the election, the presidential elections, but things like, so maybe even if you're just, like a Mill Valley resident, like what you can do to influence what's happening there, or wherever you live on a smaller scale.
Well, one examples I've been working with, I live in Corte Madera, so I've been working with the town of Corte Madera to develop a climate action committee, because they've been focusing a lot on how we can adapt after climate change and how we can help ourselves through what climate change will bring, but not how we can mitigate the disaster, and how we can act now so that we don't have to do those things in the future. So I've been working with town council members and working now on the committee to bring about that change, at least. And through the committee, things that I hope to do are pass a climate emergency declaration, which a lot of people around Marin have been working on right now, is to getting their city or their town to pass a declaration that basically states that this is a climate emergency and we recognize that, and that we are going to develop a plan on how to mitigate the disaster.
Well, I think that touches on a really interesting point. I remember maybe a couple of months ago, seeing on social media, it was a picture of the New York subway, flooded, but in a controlled flood. And someone had tweeted, MTA, what the heck is going on? And they were testing out one of their mitigation ideas for the subway of when climate change happens, this is how we're going to regulate the flooding.
Yeah.
So all these cities are already planning around the future climate crisis getting worse without saying that directly to other citizens.
Yeah.
Which is sort of a strange disconnect. So what do you think about that? Does that give the public a false sense of security?
Yeah,
or
I think
it'd be different if the cities came out and said, we believe it, this is happening, and this is how we're already planning?
Yeah, well, I think that they could actually, really up-level that amount of public outreach and the amount of impact it could have if they're going to go out and say, hey, this is an emergency, this is what's happening. Don't be worried about that, but do be worried about this climate crisis, and do take into note that it is important and that we as a city are going to take action on it, because I think that's really important, is not only to focus on how we're going to mitigate after the, once it happens, but how we're going to make sure that we're taking the urgent action now to prevent that from happening, or at least to contribute to the global movement. And, a lot of pushback I hear is that hey, it's just one city. What difference can that make? Which is also, a lot of things you hear on the personal scale, which is going vegan. People would be like, that's not going to do anything.
Right, I'm just one person. So that
you're just exactly, and you hear that a lot, but again, you can't do these things. It starts small. Look at Greta Thunberg, who started the school strike. She was just one person, and now it's grown to a movement of millions. So saying that you can't start small, it isn't true, because you can go a lot from starting small, but you also want to take into account how you can do larger things. But by cities taking those they're not small actions, but on a global scale, like smaller actions, it actually is inspiring a lot of change and inspires other cities to do the same thing. And that's what creates a movement.
Do you see that happening a lot in California cities?
Yeah, I know either Sonoma or Petaluma first started the climate emergency resolution, and then Fairfax, and now I think San Anselmo is doing it. Corte Madera might be doing it. Like, I think that they just like kind of go off each other. San Francisco just did it, and there's Alameda. Like, a lot of places are doing that, and also just like through the climate like justice world, like I think that you've seen even in the past year it kind of just go out of the roof like crazy because people are getting involved and people are spreading the news and people are sharing it with one of each other, and I think that's how it really starts, and that's how it gains traction, is by really just like spreading the word and sharing the message and doing the actions and sharing it with your friends. And if you get a climate emergency declaration, sending a note about yours to another city and urging them to do the same.
Do you think, what, in terms of like climate crisis, you mentioned the anxiety, what gives you hope?
Yeah. I guess what gives me hope is that there are people who care, and that, even though it's hard to see, people do care. I mean, this is their future, and I don't think people don't want to see a future that's better. I don't think they're like purposely like I want to go see an apocalypse. Like, right. I just don't think that's like a human trait. And yeah, there might be a few of those, but like for the most part, I think people do want to see good, and people do want to see, it progressing. I think just people are really stuck in that, like despair, and that state of apathy in the moment, because it doesn't seem possible to do in the time frame that we have, and it's just such a large undertaking. But I think there is hope, because people do care, and that once we get the traction behind it, that we'll see a lot of response from people, and that we have come so far in such a short amount of time. Like I was talking about Greta Thunberg, like we've just, ever since that and the beginning of kind of like the youth climate movement, we've seen just such an uprising of people getting involved and people actually caring, and it's just become really prevalent now. And I think that it shows that we do have the power to change this, and that it's not impossible. And you look at past, social justice movements, and you've seen that it is possible. I mean, at least on the spectrum of like climate strikes, I know that the Sunrise Organization says we need like 3.7% of the United States population to go walk out to make change, because that's been proven with other social justice movements. So it's, once you kind of look at it that way, like it's not impossible to do, and it's not something that can't be done. It's just going to take a lot of work, and it's just addressing the apathy and saying like, hey, like I'm addressing this, and I'm going to go share it with other people, and I'm going to get involved in the most I can and have the biggest impact that I can, even if that's not, super big. So I think, yeah, there's hope, and we are seeing different solutions, and things like little things are paying off, and it's not going to be impossible. It's just going to be hard.
Yes. Talking about, you were telling me that you were just at a climate activist conference.
Yeah.
Is that what it was? So do you, as part of the conference or other conferences, do you talk about like other social justice movements and kind of study what they did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was at a retreat for an organization I work with, which is called Greening Forward, which works to empower and engage young people in environmental issues. While we were at the training, we were talking about other social justice issues. One of the organizations I work with, Sunrise, the Sunrise movement really focuses on past social justice issues like the women's rights, like campaign, like Roe versus Wade, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and civil rights, like a lot of those movements were led by young people.
A lot of them were, and a lot of them were grassroots. And I think that it's something that we look, history repeats itself, blah, blah, blah. Like, it does. So I think that looking back on those, we can learn a lot about how to tackle this movement. And, there's going to be future movements, there's always going to be something to work towards. And we can use the experiences of, the past generations so that we can make the most effective change.
I love how you said that history repeats itself, but in a positive way. So it's not always like, oh, we're doing this bad thing again, but like, oh, we can repeat the positive things other generations did.
Yeah, we can look back and see what they did, what succeeded, and, play a role in that. And then also play a role for the next generation so that they can see how we succeeded, so they can do the same.
So do you think it's important? And one of the reasons why I was excited to talk to you, and I'm not all that old, but I'm pretty far from being a teenager. But like one of the things I love about working with young people is that it does keep you engaged, I think, in like the activism of whatever the age is, where when you are talking to teenagers and young people, that unless you're like a sociopath, you can't help but care about what they care about and be engaged. So do you think it's important for maybe for some of the adults who don't understand the urgency or don't believe that maybe if they like actively engaged more with youth, that would evolve their opinion?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can speak to, like, my dad, who never, like, he was not a climate person before. Like, it was never something that kind of crossed his mind. But, he's attended some strikes, and he's, like, seen these youth and their passion. And I think through that, he's been able to really connect to the issue. And I think that youth just are so passionate. And once they find something, they stick with it, and they are just, like, they can't help but like want to share it with the world. And I think being around people like that, being around the youth who are just so excited about it, is really contagious. And, it really connects you to the other generation. And also it just helps you see the crisis from another point of view, and the point of view as someone who's going to have to live and grow up with this issue and this topic, and someone whose life's going to be, directly affected by climate change, and being able to see their thoughts and hear from them about their own experiences with that. Like, even me being at the conference a few weeks ago, I was talking to a guy who was from India, and he was talking about how they were just cutting down like all the indigenous land and forcing them out of there so that they could drill for oil and drill for different things, and just being able to see that different point of view and the point of view from a person on the front lines is really inspiring and really helps you connect to the movement in different ways. And especially as someone from like Marin County in like a pretty privileged place, not like super diverse, being able to make those connections with people who, have different experiences than you, and who kind of getting you out of your bubble is really impactful and really powerful, because it really helps you see from so many different points of view. And I think also that in tackling the climate crisis, we need to look at, the crisis and the problem from so many points of view in order to get to a solution, and in order to get to a solution that'll, benefit everyone and won't harm others.
For anyone who maybe can't physically travel to talk to other people like that, are there any other ways you'd recommend like getting different points of view? And so I'm a librarian, so my mind automatically goes to any books you might have read. But if there's like any advice for someone who wants to go to the next level now of getting more information and from different perspectives, like different diverse perspectives, like what advice do you have? I
think definitely like social media is a pretty powerful tool in that sense. Are
there any good like hashtags or
yeah, I could pull it up on my phone. I don't remember the girl's name, but there was like a Ugandan climate activist who was recently like cropped out of a photo.
I wrote about
that. Like looking for those types of people and following people like Jamie Margolin and Alexandria Villaseñor, who are kind of like prominent youth activists across like the United States, like following those people and being able they post a lot about,
Yeah, so to see
different
firsthand.
people, and they work, a lot of like global organizations. So they post a lot about the other people that they work with and that type of stuff. Another like local organization that is very like diverse and has lots of different viewpoints is a group called Youth versus Apocalypse, which I work with. They're based in like Oakland, East Bay area, and they have people who are kind of on like one of the girls, I won't mention her name, but she was talking about how her grandmother, during the power outages, her grandmother was like on a breathing machine, and they don't have the money to supply that, and they cut it off during the power, and her grandmother passed away. And being able to like hear that and being able to see how much this crisis right now is affecting people, because it's not something of the future, it's affecting people right now, and being able to connect with them and see how even just being able to recognize your privilege and being able to notice that people are really dealing with this is another really powerful thing. And I'm kind of going off into a tangent and a rant, but like finding those types of organizations and attending climate strikes, because our next climate strike will be on Earth Day, I believe, and in San Francisco, and they're one of the main organizations putting that on. And, we always have them, like those people who are on the front lines come and speak, and being able to hear from their voices. And also just like climate strikes are a great way to like talk to youth. Like there's so many youth at climate strikes. We had 40,000 people last time. Like there's a lot of people. I also lead weekly climate strikes after school in Mill Valley, outside of the Redwoods Retirement Center and outside of Tamalpais High School, with a group called Seniors for Peace every Friday. And like from there, you can also, we rally different youth, so like you can meet them there, and that's also a pretty cool way. And we have kind of like, it's really bridging that gap between different generations, because we have a lot of retired folks and people who are senior citizens, and then we have teenagers and elementary schoolers, and being able to have that connection between the two generations is really powerful. And we're also able to learn so much from each other. So I think that's really cool.
Well, it sounds like, let me know if I'm wrong, that you feel empowered by information, because some of the things you've told me are pretty dark, but it does seem like, and I think that's maybe is why some people don't want to believe that it's real, or kind of just ignore it, is because they're worried the more they learn that they'll be more depressed or have anxiety. But it seems like you are kind of empowered by it. So do you think that's
and I think
just by knowing more?
I think it's unique because, I mean, this isn't true for everyone, but for me, I've just felt a sort of like fulfillment by being able to work and being able to apply my knowledge and being able to actually like go out on the streets and take action has been like a sort of like relief and a therapy for me, because I actually feel like I'm doing something. And, before, when like in between like 6th and 7th grade, I wasn't really doing much because I didn't know how. I mean, they don't teach you how to like be a community organizer in like 6th grade, but like being able to now like take action, like I realized just how much more like at peace I am with myself, and how much more like when it's always in the back of your brain, like you're not always thinking about it, but it it comes up, and it's kind of like you don't realize it, but it really does impact you, and it's kind of a big burden to be holding around. So the fact that I'm able to actually do something about it and feel like I'm making an impact on this issue has really been kind of this therapy and this sort of relief. So even though it does bring about, different stories that are like really dark and heavy, you also, that's just part of life. Like life is dark. I mean, it's light and it's happy too, but I mean, these are human problems, and we're not going to be able to, go farther if we can't acknowledge these things and think about how we can make them better. And it's just, I think we'll be much better off if we address them now, and if we also just find a way to cope with it, which for me is by taking action.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Can you, is there anything else you'd like to tell anybody listening, or any topics you think I haven't asked you about?
No, I think that's good. If anyone out there has any youth or students, I am the founder of an organization called Climate Now, which is based in Marin County and is all about providing youth with information about climate change without, scaring them out of their minds, and to kind of like bridge that gap between, the world climate activists and Marin County activists, and to give them the tools to be community organizers and so that they can take action in their community. So we have monthly meetings on the last Sunday of every month at the Larkspur Parks and Recreation office from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. And that's just a great opportunity to get youth involved. And if you're an adult, you can also check us out at www.climatenow.solutions to learn more about how you can get involved and how you can support the youth who are joining our movement. So I just want to throw that out there for anyone.
Well, and we'll add all the links to our show notes.
Yeah. So that's a great way to get involved, at least in the local community, and to help the youth to empower them. And again, youth are leading this movement, and I think that it's important that we, in order to sustain a movement, that we continue engaging new people and continue engaging, I don't know, ordinary, you could say. Not ordinary, but,
Yeah, but on that grassroots level.
On that grassroots level, and I think that that's a great way to get started.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Borrowed Time is a collaborative effort by librarians to combat climate change by discussing sustainability issues and all things related to the human influence on our ecosystem. For more episodes, visit borrowed-time.org.